No, it's broken. The rudder is broken.
Right.
It's cut now.
I heard a big clatter. What's happened, Jamie?
It's cut the rudder.
You cut it. Let me come and have a look. I heard a huge bang and a clatter.
Better come down and have a look. My conversations with Ben of Samira, who was the guy along with his wife Belle, who pretty much did their own refit. When I was chatting to him in conversation, he mentioned using the blowtorch after trying many other things. So today we're following his advice and we've got the big guns out, as you can see behind me. We've really heated that casting up now. We've just said, look, it's got to get hotter. So that's what we've done. He's given it a whack and there's a tiny bit of movement. So after an hour with the blowtorch, we've given it a couple of knocks. It has indeed moved. It's moved exactly the height of a bolt hole because we can no longer see the bolt holes. And we're now seeing a bit of stainless in the rudder stock that has never seen daylight in 10-12 years. So that's progress. The problem now is that as we've heated up the bronze, it's also heated up the fin. If you imagine the skeg that goes down into the bronze casting, or rather the bit that the bronze casting bolts onto, that's made of fiberglass, and with all the heat it's disintegrated around the outside of it. So this means it's clogging up. It's all sort of mat that's clogging up, and I think that's causing one of the problems in preventing us from pushing it any further. So just trying to scrape out what I can. See, ideally what you want is you want hot bronze and cold fiberglass. But of course that's not possible.
Everything all right down there?
No, it's broken. Please, it's broken now.
What broke?
The rudder is broken.
Right.
It's cut now.
I heard a big clatter. What's happened, Jamie?
It's cut the rudder.
You cut it. Let me come and have a look. I heard a huge bang and a clatter.
Better come down and have a look.
Yep. You're having a joke with me. You're having a little joke? I think he would be crying if it was broken. Wow, that looks. How did you do it? Heating? Heat.
Wow. Hendro power. That's how we did it.
Wow, don't get too close, dogs.
Well, I can't even begin to describe the pure joy this has brought. I'll be honest, I was getting very depressed, so was Liz. We really thought we were going to be stuck here for a long time. This is a major step forward, a big step forward. My biggest concern really was that we were going to have to cut this off and completely rebuild the skeg. Now don't forget, of course, that this part of the skeg, the fin, is very thick, and it is structurally very important because it's holding the majority of the weight of the rudder and taking all the strain when the rudder turns. So I really didn't fancy the idea of cutting this off and starting all again. So I'm really glad with Hendro's help and perseverance that we've got this far. And it has revealed, as I thought, a kind of rather fibrous looking skeg, because my theory, I think, was right. What had happened was that fin was painted. So the epoxy glue that we had put on had bonded with that when we heated it up, and that in turn had bonded with the mat underneath it, and that, I think, was what was causing half the problems. As we look inside the skeg, the bronze casting itself, you can see a layer of thick epoxy attached to paint and then glass fibre, and while the casting is still hot I'm just quickly scraping off as much as possible. Other than that, we're going to leave it in situ for the night because that bronze has to cool down very slowly at its own rate. Don't want to be putting water on it. So that's it for today. If I was still drinking, I'd be straight down that bar and knocking back 10 pints. Generator running, just doing a bit of sanding. There's not much to see here. I'm really just sanding the bottom of that skeg. I can't get to 100% of it because the rudder is still in the way, and I'm still trying to work out the best way to drop that with some kind of block and pulley system. Most interesting thing that happened today was that to buy a new sander, and all I've got to say on that is that of course you can go for the round sanders, which you see are supposed to be more efficient. But the problem is, of course, is that you need special pads for those because you Velcro them on. Sometimes you could be in places where you can't get that. So I stuck to a square or an oblong sander, complete with my face mask there. And yeah, I wanted the smaller one actually because it's a small job. We don't use it that much, so they didn't have it in stock. They had it on display, but they didn't have it in stock. And they also had quite a few makes. Now, I normally go for Makita, because back in the day Makita was the brand when it came to power tools, but I did a bit of research and it seems as if things have changed these days. Makita is still twice as expensive as Bosch, but actually in terms of their you know, the construction of them and the longevity of them, doesn't seem to be that much difference, and this certainly doesn't seem to be twice as good. If it's twice as expensive, is it going to be twice as good? No, I don't think so. So anyway, I just got a Bosch and just going to sand this little bit. I've also got the grinder out with the sanding pad on it because I just want to take away some of this here, just tidy up around the top of the skeg, because I'm going to try and attempt to glass fibre this. Now here's the other thing, I'm actually have to go back to the UK, and I'm probably going to be flying out in about a week. I could be back in the UK for 6 weeks minimum. And when I return, it could be the beginning of the wet season. So I want to get as much of this done now, ready, so that when I come back, we can get the boat back in the water as quickly as possible. So that's why I'm cracking on today. Well, here we are a couple of days later, having dropped the rudder, and you can see it's still in position. That's because Hendro is waiting for his block and pulley system, which he uses to hoist engines. Didn't want to use any of my blocks for the boat, which is probably a wise idea because that rudder is extremely heavy. However, in the meantime, what I have been doing is epoxying back up the bottom of that skeg just to start rebuilding it, because if you remember, we chiselled away above the bronze casting, and then within the fin itself that goes in that casting, quite a bit sort of came away from the top. So I'm just rebuilding that now, putting a few layers of fiberglass on. The only thing is I don't want to put too many on because I don't want to build it up too thick. You know, epoxied fiberglass is quite difficult to sand down, so I want to minimise that amount of work, and I can't do anything more now because the casting is still attached to the rudder. We need to actually lift the rudder up to remove the casting to offer it up on the skeg. So what I'm going to do now is to rebuild the little shoe, the sacrificial shoe that sits on the bottom of the rudder. This is the piece of teak that is removable, supposedly sacrificial, but actually I'm going to save it. I'm going to rebuild it. It's had a bit of woodworm in it, surprisingly, and I can only assume this happened way back when this was fitted, because there's no evidence of it. I've ground it down and washed it out with acetone. So and also I found some epoxy filler, which is great. So I'm going to use some epoxy filler to just rebuild that foot now. This is the shoe, all taped up. As you can see, it is solid teak. I'm still very curious to know how this woodworm got in there because we didn't take this off in our refit. Don't forget also, this has been bound in fiberglass and epoxy, which I've had to grind away. So I can only assume that this happened when the boat was built. Very curious. So what I was going to do was to use some putty, or filler rather, and it is marine filler. But I thought instead what I'd do is pour some epoxy resin into it, just so that I can fill up all those little holes in there, so the resin can work its way into those holes. I wasn't going to do this originally because we have only got one tin. I can't remember if I said earlier, but getting hold of good marine materials here in Indonesia is difficult. As far as I know, there's probably only 1 or 2 places where you'd have to order online and wait for it to be delivered. However, we found an unopened tin of Kosan epoxy, Kosan epoxy glue, and Kosan filler as well. So these are all marine grade, and it's what we used in the refit to rebuild our boat. It's a product I know, it's a product I trust, and a product I like working with. So it's great that we've got all these unopened tins, because it does mean I can probably use a little bit of resin just to fill out these holes first, before then finishing it off with the filler. The only question now is the blue tape going to be strong enough, or is the resin going to melt it? So what I'll do is I'll mix up the resin, I'll wait until it's starting to cure before pouring it in. One other thing, when I'm mixing this up, sometimes I get bubbles in the resin. Now, I don't know if anyone's seen these fantastic YouTube videos of wood turners. There are some really, really good videos out there of very clever, very talented wood turners, and they're turning big blocks of wood, which they then fill with coloured resin, and then they turn it and they make incredible furniture, lampshades, that kind of thing, tabletops. And Liz and I have been watching these for months, and they're really satisfying to watch. So this is as close as I'm going to get as one of those videos, pouring a little bit of resin inside this. And the reason why I mentioned bubbles in your epoxy and then quickly started talking about those wood turning videos is that on those videos, what they do is, after mixing the epoxy, the 2-part epoxy, they then put their epoxy into a special vacuum machine. And what that does is it actually extracts the air out of the bubbles, so they end up with a lovely epoxy mix with absolutely no bubbles. Obviously, I'm not going to do that here. It's not so important. This item, by the way, is not load bearing. It's not taking any strain. It is literally just put at the end of the rudder, just in case the rudder were to move up. It's got something there to stop it from popping out of the pintle. So yeah, time to mix up the epoxy and do a little bit of pouring. Yesterday I went out looking for electronic scales because ours broken, but I found one better than that. Kitchen measuring spoons. They came as a set of 6, and they've got the weights on them because this is a 2 to 1 epoxy. I've just got 2 spoons, one double the size of the other, obviously. And I'm going to put 2 spoons of each epoxy and hardener in my little jam jar. And I then found some metal chopsticks, which make very good stirring sticks. The whole lot, everything that I bought yesterday, cost me about £5. So you probably can't see that, but that is full of bubbles, unfortunately. I don't have that vacuum machine, but it doesn't really matter, does it? Of course, if you were putting this on fiberglass anyway, you'd be brushing or rolling it on, so it's not important. But I'm just going to let that sit just for a couple of minutes before pouring it into the shoe, which I'll try and do on a flat surface. And the working time of this epoxy is around about 10 minutes. Don't forget, we're in the tropics. It's quite hot here, so this does tend to go off quite quickly. And sets, obviously it takes a few hours to set properly, but you've only got about 10 minutes before it starts thickening up quite quickly. So just a couple more minutes and I'll pour that in.